Hello and welcome to the Scuttlebutt Podcast. I'm your host, Brock Briggs, and this show exists to uncover the stories and tactics from the world's most interesting veterans at the top of their craft. This show will make you more informed about unique industries and careers, get you asking questions that challenge you personally and professionally, and give you specific steps to becoming more lethal in your life and business. Today, I'm speaking with Kieran Carroll. Kieran is a former surface warfare officer in the Navy and now the chief strategy officer at ZeroEyes, a software company using computer vision to detect weapons on video feeds and stop active shooters. Expect to learn what exactly computer vision is and the problems it faces today, which hinge around quality of data. We hear how ZeroEyes started by creating their own data sets by walking around with weapons on video cameras to train their initial machine learning models. We talk about dual use products and how to manage complexity of having customers in public and private sectors. And we also get into deciding what problems are worth solving in your business and how to fail at a lot of things, but still come out on top. You can find this episode of the podcast, as well as the video version, transcripts, and other written content to keep learning, all at scuttlebuttpodcast.co. Please enjoy this conversation with Kieran Carroll.
So my wife texted me like 15 minutes ago with a picture of a golden retriever puppy and was like, "Hey, I think it's time to get a second dog. We already have one golden, and I have really young kids. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old and a 9-month-old. And the 4 and 2-year-old have been like talking about getting a puppy. And I was like resisting for a while, but I think we're gonna do it. So it's a really cute little golden retriever puppy.
Oh man,
So
that is
that's
a big step there, bringing an animal into the house.
yeah.
On top of kids, I feel like especially Golden's like great with kids and
Oh,
kind
they're
of.
awesome. Yeah, they're the best. So that's been preoccupying me for the last 15 minutes.
I thought
Logistically.
you were about to drop on me that your wife just texted you saying that you guys were pregnant or something like that. I was like,
God,
man, we're getting heated here quick.
no, I hope not. I hope she wouldn't do that in a text, but you never know these days. But as a phone call, got
What have you found to be the most shocking thing to you about fatherhood? I just selfishly, my wife is due this upcoming Friday. We're recording this first week of August here. So I'm pending becoming a father here any day now. What has surprised you the most? And what do you think has been the most challenging?
Yeah, that's a great question. By the way, congrats. Hopefully you guys survive. You will. I think that the most surprising thing was honestly how easily we adapted. We didn't do like any of those baby classes. Like I don't know, because we had younger nieces and nephews and stuff and like always felt ready, but nothing ever fully prepares you, but you overcome and adapt. And my first 2 kids were girls and they're sassy and emotional and it's fun. I would remember coming home sometimes and I'd have both of them just yelling at me for stuff, and also my wife. So 3 ladies in my life yelling at me constantly. But no, kids are awesome. Kids are fun. And then we had a son. He's a whole different story. But it's awesome. I'm excited for you guys. That's cool.
That's
You
super exciting.
Rocky, do you know what you're having, girl or boy?
No, we don't.
Okay.
We've kept it a surprise. So we've got names picked out for both directions, but we're
Okay.
just rolling with the punches and seeing what happens the day of.
Cool. All right, man. Best of luck.
Yeah, we're strapping in a big way. I really appreciate you joining me today, and I have been really looking forward to this conversation. I think to tee up our conversation, it would be helpful to get a little bit of background on you. Maybe take 2 to 3 minutes, give me like high level overview of what lands you here today at ZeroEyes.
Yeah, sure. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., went to high school right outside the district in Maryland. I was really fortunate. I went to the Naval Academy out of high school. And then from Navy, I went and did about 10 years of active duty service. I was a really bad surface warfare officer. I did one tour on a ship. And then through just a series of like fortunate errors and mistakes on the Navy's part, I ended up spending the vast majority of my time within the special operations community and did basically everything within NSW through Joint Special Operations. I spent a couple of weird years of my life of the National Security Agency up in Fort Meade working counterterrorism stuff. And then I made it all the way over to like Naval Special Warfare Development Group. And so I had a really fun 10 years, deployed a lot. But going back to the wife and kids thing, time to settle down. And I basically left active duty in 2018. And I started looking for what was the next thing. And I did a really bad transition, to be honest with you. I didn't really do a lot of preparation. I relied on the network. And again, I lucked into an interesting role. I went into consulting at PwC. Actually, another former Navy guy basically got me the job. And I landed in Philly. My wife had been in Philly. She's a lawyer, so her entire professional network is here. and trying to make the best of Philly. During that time, I knew that I always wanted to do something for myself, start a business or join some sort of startup where I could have a bigger impact and be able to chart my own course. And during that time, I met a couple of really incredible entrepreneurs here in Philly. They all happened to be former enlisted SEALs, and they'd all gone and gotten MBAs and that kind of thing. And they had this really incredible vision. And the Parkland shooting had just happened back in 2018. And they basically were like, look, what could we do from a technology standpoint that could have helped mitigate the next Parkland style shooting? And for those of you who don't necessarily remember Parklands, that kid wasn't supposed to be at school that day, but someone saw him on campus and they knew that he was there. So a radio call had gone out. And the problem is they didn't know where he had gone. And it turns out he went into a stairwell. He had a rifle in a duffel bag. He took the rifle out and was basically preparing himself in a prep stage in the stairwell. And there were a series of security cameras in the stairwell. And if someone had been watching their cameras, they would have noticed a guy with an assault rifle in a stairwell. And it turns out that the vast majority of active shooters actually stage in an area with a visible firearm underneath an existing security camera. And the guys who started the company were like, what if we just built a software that integrates to those existing cameras and detects a visible gun? And that's exactly what we did. It's taken us 5 years, going back to 2018, to bring a product to market and hire a really awesome team and do all the stuff that we have to do as a business. But I just got really fortunate and I worked basically for free on the side for about a year with these guys as they went through every true sort of tech entrepreneurship stage of cashing in all their retirement accounts and selling all their real estate and literally putting every last nickel into the company that they had. So literally burned the boats. There was no turning back for them. And then since then, we've just been fortunate to recruit a really incredible team. So that's like the ZeroEyes backstory there.
No, that's fantastic. So many interesting threads there that we're going to be pulling on well during our conversation. Do you want to maybe outline? You said that ZeroEyes is a detection software for picking up guns on video cameras. Maybe outline a little bit of what the technology is that's behind that. And then I'm curious why we're going to get into like why this hasn't happened yet. Like a big critical question that every startup faces is how come nobody has done this before? And maybe history is littered with other startups who have tried this, but maybe start with exactly what is the technology underlying ZeroEyes?
Yeah, so we classify ourselves as what's called a computer vision software. So computer vision is a subset of artificial intelligence. Right now, obviously, AI basically means whatever you want it to mean. Everyone's an AI company these days. But we're computer vision first. And basically, computer vision is you take a series of algorithms, you feed those algorithms with data. In our case, it's images of firearms of people with guns. And then you basically build models to accurately detect and quickly classify those images. So that's the only thing we do as a company. So we don't do like facial recognition or facial detection or any sort of behavioral characterization. Obviously, some of the stuff has got a fair amount of media attention. We saw the utility of just being able to do really simple object recognition really quickly. And that's what we took to market. And that object happens to be a firearm. And then on top of that, somewhat unique to our company is that we're a fully managed service, right? If you think of buying a house analogy, right, there's really two ways to move into a new house. You can buy something that's pre-built, right, an existing home, or you can go out and buy boards and hammers and nails and saws and build something yourself. In the industry that we're mostly playing in, nobody wants to put the tools together and the pieces together. They'd rather buy a service that comes prepackaged. And that's exactly what we did. So we took to market a fully managed service. We have 24/7 operation centers to basically verify every time our algorithm thinks something is a gun. Our software right now is deployed across tens of thousands of cameras. You can think of us as a massive force multiplier across all these different cameras. It turns out that most humans don't have the ability to actively monitor hundreds or thousands of cameras, but the AI does, the software does. So it looks frame by frame and basically says, is there a gun in this frame or not? So we process through hundreds of millions of frames every single day to look for firearms. And as it happens, we see firearms every single day across our deployed customer set. And right now, the software is heavily in schools. I think we're in about 30 states right now across various public K through 12 and higher education districts. Commercially, we work with many Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies, like some of the biggest brands you can think of in the world, third-party logistics, healthcare, big box retail, shopping malls, commercial property groups, basically places that have had either serious gun violence concerns or they've had an active shooter event in the past. And then we have a government, a federal business as well that we actually just split out a couple of months ago. We call it Z Government Solutions. It's a separate LLC now. And we do a little bit more boutique development, particularly for Department of Defense. So in addition to doing our commercial firearm detection, we also do stuff with drones and robotics, like robot dogs and stuff like that. We have software running on those robot dogs and build additional sort of capabilities. In addition to doing firearms, we'll also do some people, you think of like intruder detection, right? So people detection or vehicle detection. We do stuff, smaller objects enhanced, cell phones, cameras, radios, think about force protection or like a targeting scenario. And then we layer that computer vision software into other platforms like mobile platforms and that kind of thing. So there's a ton of interesting stuff the DoD is doing. You're a former Navy guy. I'm a former Navy guy. To their credit, the Department of Defense has lowered the barrier of entry for many small tech companies to do business with the DoD, which 5-10 years ago was not necessarily the case, and it's been really cool to see that. And then, okay, yeah, and then part two of your question was more along the lines of actually remind me what the second question was. Sorry.
Yeah, you're okay. I was going to tee that up.
You
So
know,
obviously, you've got computer vision, which has been around since the 1960s or so. It's not like exactly a new technology, but compute power is obviously a big deal and able to detect more things faster now. It's probably just a speed thing, really, is probably the primary difference. Why is it that any company doing computer vision right now doesn't just train on essentially all objects? Like, why is it that you're having to go so specifically? I was chatting with a guy a couple months ago at a conference, and he works at this company, MashGen, that is basically using computer vision to detect objects at convenience stores where you just go up and it like reads the image in whatever angle that it is, and then it rings it up based off of that. So I guess my question would be like, why not just try to index all objects if that's even possible, and then be the provider of computer vision?
sure. Yeah, no, it's a totally fair question. So you asked what's changed, right, in the last 10, 15 years. The unit economics of it got a lot more affordable for end users. That's one of the biggest things, right? So really high end graphic processing units. We use NVIDIA graphics cards. I think the vast majority of computer vision guys use NVIDIA stuff. Gotten way more affordable. It's mass market at this point. That being said, they're still very high end. These solutions are still relatively costly, but they're palatable at this point, especially for like very mature companies that understand the value there. And then as far as why are we only doing firearm stuff commercially? And that's a great question. There are many AI companies or computer vision companies that will tell you that they can build you a solution for anything, that they can do any kind of object recognition, they can do behavioral characterization, they can do predictive analytics to say they can predict when a fight's going to break out, or if someone slips and falls, they can say like that's a slip and fall. And realistically, it comes down to two things. One is the quality of the data that actually goes into these algorithms. The vast majority of companies out there web scrape the internet for data, right? Internet's biggest repository of data right now, which sounds like an easy hack, right? You and me over the weekend could go download 6 million images of whatever we're looking for and put it into an open source GitHub computer vision model. And we will probably have a 75% accuracy rate or whatever, the effective solution, let's call it that. But it turns out that even though that sounds impressive, realistically, most end users aren't going to pay for something that is only 75% effective. Particularly when it comes to stuff like firearms, you got to be damn near close to perfect before it becomes effective. And when
Because you're like the other end of that is, I'm assuming the detection comes with, hey, we now need to do something about this. So if
oh
it's
sure,
not a gun, then it's, hey, we just wasted a bunch of time and dispatched the
yeah,
entire West Coast police force to a single
right,
location.
yeah, one false positive that turns into a false alarm can be absolutely devastating for an end user. And you think of like a school scenario where now you just cause a lockdown of the school, so there's lost resources for time to learn and the police and everything else. So we can't really afford to bring a product to market that is less than like a 99.999% effective rate. And it takes a long time to get there. And a lot of development, and a lot of time and energy and money to basically what we call chasing nines. So you're chasing those nines. There are a lot of companies that will build you something to 75, 80, or 90%, market it and try to sell it. And it goes back to the tool versus the full house analogy, right? There is not as much demand anymore for just simple computer vision analytic tools. A lot of the stuff is just becoming standardized on a camera anyway. So like really stuff that requires really big pixels to do classification, like a person or a vehicle. 5-10 years ago, like that was niche, and there was a lot of AI development that went into doing that. And now that's like a standard feature on those cameras. But what we don't think will ever be standard are those smaller objects in hands where you have to be extremely accurate and extremely right the vast majority of the time for it to be effective and for people to actually pay for it. And that's where we found our niche. When we started the company, we did the typical thing where we went to Google and we downloaded 2 million images of what Google said was a firearm. You're at the mercy of how people label data on the internet, which you're young enough to be like a completely like you're a digital native, I guess, right, is the right term. So you've seen how people label internet data, right? It's all over the place. And then on top of that, the other thing that we realized is that just downloading images without a ton of context doesn't really lead to good performance. So we took a sort of a radical approach 5 years ago. We decided to build all of our data organic to the company. So for the first like 2, 3 years, it was literally like the guys who were early in the company. We walked around with firearms under every different type of security camera that's common on the market. We try to replicate as much variability as possible. So you think about like different manufacturers, different resolutions, heights, angles, lighting, background conditions, multiple people in frame, all these different variables. And that's how we've basically been able to master what we're doing. And now we have patents around the methodology and all this other stuff. But that's what it was. And no one at the time was doing it, right? They were just relying on simple web scraped images and running it through an algorithm and trying to take that to market. So for us, it was like, how do you outperform what everybody else is doing?
That is so interesting. And I was literally just about to ask, what did you guys just go and walk around with a bunch of guns to create
Yeah.
your own input? That is so fascinating and very do things that don't scale type of thing, because I can't even imagine, as you said, you highlighted all of the different variables you need there. It's cameras, it's probably different types of weapons, all different types, colors, weathers, and then mixing and matching all of them. What
Yeah.
does that mean for your guys' continuous development of the model then? Because part of what makes machine learning models very good is that they continue to be fed with new data. Are you guys continuing to do that? Or now that you have customers, are you able to get data from real live scenarios and pull that into your data set as well?
Yeah, it's a mixture of both. We've obviously matured since walking around our CEO's backyard with guns, with like security cameras taped up on a pole.
Right.
So right now we have a 5,000 square foot green screen lab right up the street from me, fully green screen. We brought like a Hollywood producer in to come in and build a green screen. And we have, I think, camera drops for about 250 cameras to put up on the walls. So now we have manufacturers send us new stuff. We put it up there, and we have the ability to replicate any customer environment in that green screen lab and then walk around with guns. So when you think about how we scale and do this at scale and build really unique models designed for a specific customer environment, that's how we do it. We started out doing like just the really common guns in like mass shooting and gun violence here in the US. So semi-automatic pistols and then AR style rifles. But then in the last few years, we've the data set from everything to like AK style rifle, hunting rifle, shotgun, revolver, scoped rifle. We work with DoD, right? So we do foreign military weapons. We do more exotic weapon classes. We do shoulder fire stuff, think of like RPGs and Carl Gs, like and stuff like that. And that's really where we built our niche too, is we have the ability to basically bring those weapons into any type of environment. We're able to replicate the environment. You think of some really unique, interesting environments, like a casino, right? Casinos are challenging because you got so many flashing lights going off, you have weird floor rug patterns, you have all these people walking around. And for us to actually go to a casino and collect data by walking around casino floors with guns, I mean, that's not going to happen, right? No one's going to let us do that. But we can replicate that in an artificial environment and train them unique custom data sets for their environment. The DoD is another good example. I think early in the company, we got somewhat lucky and we got put on a Department of Defense contract through the Joint AI Center to build software recognition models for a very specific platform called GBOSS, which is like a camera platform. You used to see them all over FOBs and stuff like in Afghanistan and Iraq. And the DoD actually wanted us to go out. I think they want us to go to East Africa to collect data in a real environment. And we're like, look, we think that we can de-risk a lot of this stuff by just doing this in a green screen lab. We're like, you don't have to pay for it. Like the risk of sending a bunch of guys out there to a totally not permissive environment, it would be a little bit much. And that's what we did. And we proved out the DoD and showed them. And now we do our robot dog development in there, and we do our drone development and stuff like that. So it's really cool and unique to us of how we actually do that. I don't see a ton of like computer vision folks doing that. We've heard Tesla may use green screen to some degree, but we don't really run across very many other people that have sort of mastered that.
That is incredibly interesting. So my next question with this is, when the computer or the software detects an object, are you guys training the model to where it will actually detect the type of weapon? Obviously, this is a rifle style, but
Yeah.
if you're training it on specific models of weapons, is it able to call out those things? Or what are the flags that it's throwing off to the person that's monitoring, saying, oh,
Yeah.
hey, we have a rifle style weapon, or no, this is like a Remington, blah, blah, whatever. It gets into the specifics. Just what is it and what information is it providing to the user of the software?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when we first started the company, we were like, we're going to try to get it as accurate as possible to the model of weapon. So AR style rifle, AK style rifle, right? Whatever. And we started doing that. And the end user feedback that we typically got was like, it's actually not that helpful for them because in the moment, they're really just responding to that image. The image is going to be like a timestamp, a geolocation of like where it is in the building, and then a key frame image detection. A person with a gun, there's a bounding box drawn around what the AI algorithm thinks is a gun, and they have that image to go off, and that image gets broadcast simultaneously to folks on site. So think of like a school environment, it would be like the superintendent and their staff, anybody involved from a safety or security perspective, so like a school resource officer, for example, and then simultaneous notification direct to 911. So everyone's getting that simultaneously with the image. And the feedback was like, look, like they didn't care if it was like a Remington versus a Glock, right? Like they had the image, they knew that there was a threat, and they're at that point. I think that probably the more helpful stuff would be like, okay, does this look like an assault rifle or a pistol? Because the response procedures there could be like way different tactically. And we had the ability to do it, and we can flip that switch if we need to. But most customers haven't asked for it. Like they're totally happy just getting the image. They can make their own sort of verification and think through tactically what they need to do. So I
I
don't know if that
wonder
makes
if that's
sense.
actually a different, maybe a similar problem, but a different customer. Like a customer of that might be like the police force, but like it from an investigative standpoint, it's hey, there was a shooter and we couldn't find him for some reason, but we know that it was this type of weapon or
Yeah.
something like that.
So
But
yeah, it's funny you say that because we're deployed into a bunch of smart city deployments, municipalities. And in the last couple of weeks alone, we've been responsible in one location in particular for two arrests. And the last one was from last earlier on Friday, where we detected the guy with a gun. It was like a Glock of some sort. And by the time the police found him, he didn't have the gun anymore, but he was clearly caught with a gun. And this dude was a pretty bad guy. He had multiple violent felony warrants out for his arrest. He actually fought with police. He tried to run. And it turns out that they think that he probably either sold the gun or handed it off to somebody, which is pretty common behavior, particularly like on transit platforms, as we're now learning. But they were able to help build a case against this guy based on the forensics that we provided, on the detections that we provided. So we're
wow,
starting to see this in a little bit different of a use case for what we started the company really focused on the active shooter threat, but now it's okay. Can you help identify people displaying guns, particularly in cities that are gang affiliated? Some of the gun violence that we see, a lot of gang initiations involve showing their gun, displaying their gun, particularly in parks or like transit or other places. And if we can help identify bad actors and help law enforcement take them off the street, I think that's a win. I think
absolutely.
yeah, I think NYPD once said that there's really only 400 like truly bad, violent felons in New York City that are known to carry weapons, and like they have a really hard time tracking them. But apparently, a lot of these guys display guns under cameras all the time, and like the ability to detect that behavior is huge for these guys.
Yeah, I'm sure that the like closed circuit TV systems of like cities and thinking of like where it's more popular, like certainly in the UK, I have to think that the application for that is very large.
Oh yeah,
What
definitely.
one of the things that you had told me in prep for this convo, you said that you referred to you guys as like the lead dual use, talking about commercial or versus like government versus private. And you were talking at the beginning about how you guys have recently spun that off. Dual use, I feel, is a very popular term to throw around. However, it presents you a bunch of problems from a product perspective of where you're solving for two different end cases, as we've been talking about here. I was chatting with former guest of the show, Ben Coleman. One of the things that he had brought up, he said, how do they allocate time and resources to solving those different problems? Because as you said, they're different problems that really need the different pain points. So how do you guys think about allocation of time and resources for those?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think if it's the same Ben Coleman, I think of he led like the innovation group. But yeah, I think dual use it's an overhyped term without doubt. I think people, particularly venture capitalists and investment groups, that's like a buzzword for them, right? Because that basically tells them that they have access to multiple markets when they invest. So it can be a good thing. I see dual use thrown a lot at companies like Palantir and Anduril and Shield AI and some of these other folks that have basically specifically raised money predicated on being defense technology, not necessarily dual use. That's not to say that what they're building doesn't have commercial use application, but like they are not focusing on it. So when I say that we're dual use, I think we're true dual use because our company is literally focusing on two different markets, commercial and defense. And we have traction, major traction in some cases in both of those markets. And it is literally the exact same product with minimal re-engineering that we're putting into schools as we put onto military bases. So that's how I categorize dual use. And with our investors, like they understand that we don't pitch ourselves necessarily as like a defense first company like Anduril did when they went to go raise money, or Palantir or one of these other guys. I'm not disparaging them at all. Those companies are crushing it. They have found massive product market fit. They have finally understood how to bridge the gap, particularly on the defense side. I aspire literally just to be just like them. But to your point about how do we approach it, there was a little bit of mixed messaging for a while because, for example, as we're going to sell into schools or into at the state level, interfacing with policymakers and that kind of thing, and they pull up our website and they're like, "Oh, what are you guys doing with drones? I thought you were just doing like firearm detection." Right? So there are questions around that, and that's why we split out the government solutions business and rebranded that to really only focus on Department of Defense and also broaden us from just doing firearm detection into other object classification, other like autonomy. We're playing all these weird little pots now. And we're rolling the dice. It's a gamble. We are very disciplined, I think, when it comes to building a company. And that's where we're laser focused on bringing one product to market on the commercial side. So anything that's not that is a distraction. You have to balance engineering resources against it and AI machine learning resources. We have a relatively small go-to-market team on the government solutions side that is out there chasing down small business innovation research grants and other sort of things that we can plug ourselves into. And they're being very successful doing it. Now the question is, do we invest further and more heavily into that team? And we're going to a Series B, and part of the messaging there to prospective investors is yes, we do think of this as a true dual use opportunity, and we're gonna invest appropriately into that team to make sure that we're capturing as much of the market as possible. Because up until now, we've danced around it. We've band-aided, right? We've band-aided it across the last 18 months or 2 years. But there's the money's there. There's product market fit. The capability makes sense. More importantly, the Department of Defense is willing to pay a premium for that capability. So it hits our investment marks that we need to look at when we're saying, like, is this a viable thing? So I know that's going to answer your question, but that's how we think about it. And realistically, I think both arms of the business have the ability to be valued at $1 billion+ in the next like 3, 4, 5 years.
You were talking about having traction in both of them earlier, and early on, you mentioned that you have this deployed across tens of thousands of cameras. Can you maybe give me a sense for the size of the business today, what you guys are doing in revenue, if you're able to share rounds of funding? You mentioned Series B. Give me a sense of for the size and the scale of what you guys are or where you are today.
Yeah, we started the company in 2018 with 7 or 8 folks, the core founding team, a few other people, myself included, that were just early joiners. And then fast forward today, so we're about 165 total employees between W-2 and 1099. We're based right outside of Philadelphia, but we have a small office in DC. We have another office in Hawaii. We're looking to regionalize some office and some operation capacity. So we've grown dramatically in the last 5 years. And the other thing you have to take into account too is COVID, right? Amped down everything down for about 2 years, 18 months or 2 years. So I think we've grown really fast as a company. As far as revenue goes right now, we're in the double-digit million recurring. I think we'll probably be double where we're currently sitting by the end of this year. So we have a lot of opportunity in the pipeline for the next 5 months of the year. We are hitting our numbers from a board perspective. I can't give you exact numbers because it's a lot of this is just like we're a private company. But yeah, so we're crushing it right now, or at least it seems that way. But every day is a knife fight and every day is a roller coaster. We're still a true tech startup. As far as our sort of our fundraising journey, 2018, 2019, it pretty quickly was apparent that we needed to raise money to sustain the business and hire specialists, particularly on the engineering side. We did like a $5.5 million seed round. A large amount of that was like friends and family, some smaller funds, some angels, that kind of thing. And then once we got product market fit by 2021, we did a $21 million Series A round, roughly like 20.9 million Series A. Some larger funds came in, some folks that were just institutional venture capital investors, and taking a bunch of companies to market. And now we're at the point where we need to start looking towards a Series B. And obviously, there's a lot of questions about the size of the round and all that stuff. But I think the way this is lining up for us right now, and from our perspective, we will have one of the largest Series B of any computer vision company to date. And if you want to get more specific with it, of any computer vision security software company, because we largely play in the physical security space, because the numbers, revenue numbers support it, the market supports it. We've built the company to be really competitive, right? So we rarely compete on anything. In fact, I don't even think we have very many direct competitors, at least ones that we see in the market. There's a ton of companies out there that say they can do this and whatever else, but realistically, they're imitators, they're not competitors. So we have a complete green field in front of us in the commercial space. And we're to the point now where economically, I'll just use excuse me, our education vertical as an example. For the last 3 years within education, we had a go-to-market team that literally went district to district across states to try to sell this. And it really quickly became apparent that economically that wasn't the best model. But because of the way that we built the company and the fact that we were so competitive, we're the patent holder and everything's built here in the US by US citizens, and we have major US government validation from like DHS and DOD, it became really apparent that like we could go directly to policymakers at state houses and ask for direct appropriation. And that's what we've done. So in the last year or so, we've executed a strategy across states to go take down way larger pots of money direct to the company that we can put across school districts. And that solves the problem of us having to go district to district and sign different contracts with different folks. But it also makes it way more affordable to the state taxpayer because we're a SaaS platform where economies of scale savings come in a big way. States have major purchasing power. And on top of that, it looks good for states to be working with veteran companies. And then 165 employees, 80% of the company is a military veteran. We hire veterans. We really value that. We are really trying to help bring veterans into emerging technology jobs. So we hit all these wickets for state policymakers. And the other thing too is we're not political, right? This is a very bipartisan sort of common sense solution. We're not playing into the Second Amendment debate. We're not playing into the civil rights debate. It's really do thread that needle. And most of these states right now are looking for bipartisan wins. They're looking for stuff around school security and school safety that they can take to their constituents and be like, look, like we're actually doing something useful instead of just getting stuck about taking everyone's guns or civil rights and mental health and all that sort of stuff. I think that we're really effective right now. And that's some of the messaging, obviously, going to a Series B that we want to be able to share with investors that, like, look, we have a huge advantage, first mover advantage. And we've kept that up for the last 5 years. And then on the defense side, the messaging is a little bit different. But like I said earlier, to the DoD's credit, they've done a great job working with small tech companies. And we're taking advantage of that. We're working to get it onto like production contracts and service wide. And the Army's maybe trying to write some requirements around this, and the Air Force is trying to do the same thing. So I think in the next couple of years, 18 months or so, we'll be through that really common thing that everyone talks about, like Death Valley between like capability origination and the servers actually buying it in a recurring status, like a production contract or like the palming for it, right? Or all these like fun acquisition terms you hear. So we're almost there. Like we're really working diligently towards that. I think we'll be there pretty soon.
You guys are fighting a couple like pretty serious problems here. Like you, on one hand, are battling a tech problem. You're dealing with something that computer vision like maybe hasn't been used in this application before. So you have that. And then you also have, as you've highlighted, a policy problem in terms of this is something that, regardless of where you fall on the aisle, school shootings are bad. I don't care what, if you're Republican or Democrat, nobody wants those. And this is something that probably goes far beyond just like whether, as you said, an agreement on something like that. What is it that between those two, what do you think is the bigger of the problem there? What is the biggest challenge that you guys are facing in your growth?
Yeah, because we were like basically the first to market building this, there's no playbook, right? So we were literally building this as we're taking it to market and also trying to convince people at the same time of the utility. I think ultimately the biggest challenge will be on the policy side. The way I like to think about this, right? If you look at how building code and fire code more specifically developed over the last 75 years, I think that we're going to see a weapons detection capability develop very similar, particularly for public facing buildings. And by that, right now, you have a 15 more times chance of dying in a gun violence or mass shooter incident than you do in a building fire. And the reason why is because we've incorporated fire code into building code in the last 75 years. And what that took was essentially it started as a local ground movement and then worked all the way up into federal policy. And that's what we're going to see, I think, in the next 10 years. I'm not saying it has to be ZeroEyes only. I'm saying that there's probably other providers out there, metal detectors and that kind of thing, that would also meet that wicket. But really quickly, we are moving in that direction in society. And I think it's a bipartisan thing. I don't think it's going to interfere with the Second Amendment or people that feel very strongly about gun laws. We're really only looking towards publicly facing buildings like a school or a mall or a place like that where chances are They don't even want, most of these guys, you can't bring firearms in these buildings anyway. And that's where we're going to go. And it's a little bit like a slippery slope down to the surveillance state and all these other things. Like, yes, but that's where you really do need to rely on good US manufactured companies that understand that and aren't going to stray into places where gray areas where you're compromising your freedoms and constitutional rights. So that's the other thing too, that, and it sounds weird to say this because we're a really small company and we're still relatively new, but we are on the bleeding edge of all this policy stuff. We spend a large amount of time educating policymakers congressionally, so in both the House and Senate, a lot of policymakers in states on all these different things. And one of the bigger ones that I'm on this train right now is right now in public sector networks, the vast majority of software that touches public sector networks it's actually offshore developed. So it's developed in China, India, Eastern Europe, some degree Israel, places that have pretty verified national security threats and implications at this point. And the US government in the last 5 years has done a relatively good job about tamping down Chinese manufactured hardware products. So in particular cameras. And then earlier last week, the House just passed a bill saying that federal agencies can't use Chinese manufactured drones anymore. I don't know what took so long, but we're finally there. And what's going to happen is, and I'll mark my words, in the next 2-3 years, we're going to see a huge pushback against software. And that's been the really tough one for now. And 5 years ago, we made a bet and we said, look, like it would have been cheaper to operate and develop our stuff in India or China or other places. But we said, we see that there's going to be almost a headwind against this kind of stuff coming down the pipe from a regulatory standpoint. And so we made a bet 5 years ago, and I think we were right. So everything that we do is built here in the US by US citizens. The vast majority of other companies that operate in space don't do that. And they're going to be in for a major rude awakening in the next 2-3 years when the government clamps down hard against anything that's been subsidized by the taxpayer, right? So that also includes critical infrastructure, that includes like the sled market, schools, all that stuff, because at the end of the day, it's all taxpayer money. So companies need to start future-proofing themselves against that and move their development out of Eastern Europe, for example, or China. And we're seeing defense tech companies get caught up in this too, to where they have to go back and recode their entire code base. It's coming. Again, feels weird to say this because like we're a really small, sort of inconsequential company, but we are in policymaker meetings all the time on Capitol Hill trying to push this because we believe in it.
It sounds like those larger issues at play, the geopolitical stuff, is something that is near and dear to you. And as the chief strategy officer, like those are very strategic points that could make or break your company. Should you have chosen to go the other way, if you foresee this massive wave that's working against you, you need to evade that. What are the other things that are on your mind in that role that you're trying to, either problems you're trying to mitigate or initiatives that you're trying to push forward that you think are critical to the company's success?
Yeah, so I think really my role is growth. First and foremost, how do we rapidly accelerate growth, which is not necessarily the same as the sales and marketing growth approach because theirs is more calculated. We have obviously I like to say this, we have 15 MBAs on the management team here. So everything's like very metrically driven, right? So the sales and marketing team, like they're heavily focused on meeting their KPIs and their metrics based on their growth metrics. I think I get to have a little bit more like unstructured fun, right? I'm literally looking for easy buttons to accelerate growth. And one of the things right now is the government affairs game across states, across into Congress, going back to being a dual use technology, right? We have a lot of different inroads into different places based on that. So our placement and access across policymakers spans not just school security, but also critical incidents, critical infrastructure, defense. You look at some like the border crossing use cases of what they're trying to do down at the border. Our technology plays into all of that. So we have multiple avenues to get to policymakers. The other thing is roadblocks, right? Like our team takes a heavy look at roadblocks to success. So that's everything from like competitive analysis. So we look at across the competitive landscape, not just the folks that are like necessarily competing with us directly, but who's competing with us on a resourcing basis. In some cases, if we can't outcompete them, how do we partner with them to make it a more palatable solution for end users? And the other thing that kind of leads into is strategic partnerships. So in the last 5 years, we have largely sold direct to the end user, which absolutely has its benefits. For one thing, you control the entire life cycle from development to deployment to basically keeping the end user happy from a customer success standpoint. And I think that works really well until you need to scale to hit that next $100 million of revenue. And then you have to work in channel partnerships, which are the way that most companies go to market in the security space are through channel partnerships. So for a long time, we were like a maverick, I guess is the right word. We didn't really focus on channel partnerships. That's changing really rapidly. And the security space is very fractured, right? So there's really channels for everything. You have distributors and wholesalers and dealers and integrators and all these different things, right? It's my team's job is to figure out like which ones are the easy button that will actually get us out into the market at scale rapidly, where we can still control the vast majority of the life cycle. So from a quality control and quality assurance aspect, like I don't necessarily want an integrator going installing our product. Like our team still needs to do that. So the value that the channel for us has is direct introductions to end users and helping us work the sale. Whereas we still maintain, because we're a managed service, right? We still maintain constant contact with the end user once we're up and running. This is very atypical for our industry. So we're like on the forefront of trying to figure this out, bringing the channel in to where it makes sense. But that being said, we're in discussions with major channel providers at this point. We've worked deals with them. We're trying to figure it out together. Some of these channel providers some of them make huge acquisitions in the space every year. And so that's a potential off ramp for the company. If it gets to that, I don't think it will. But that's really how we're going to grow and scale the business on the commercial side. On the defense side, we're still relatively small, even though we have primed small projects. But I think it's going to be like, where do we put ourselves into the bigger defense primes? Those conversations are ongoing as well. So you think about Lockheed and Boeing and Raytheon and General Dynamics and those kind of guys, right? Who's out to some degree. So a lot of these companies now have a pretty successful AI track record. And it's like just basically plugging our capabilities into what they need. So that's how we're going to get to scale, I think, if that makes sense.
I know you said that several of those channels are in the works, so you probably can't share details on those, but like maybe any past successes that you've had in channels that are like, can you put a name to what those are or like the direction that you're trying to go to that you think might be
Yeah.
informative that kind of explains like what your rationale is for wanting to go that way?
Yeah. It becomes a math problem, right? That we hire an account executive or a sales rep, and they're responsible for closing, let's call it like $1 million of recurring revenue every year. Like that's their quota. And if I hire 20, the target should be $20 million of recurring revenue. And the problem is these are expensive. For the most part, they're expensive hires, right? So the channel math breaks down, particularly if you can plug into a place like Motorola, for example, has 15,000 salespeople. You're not compensating them the same way that you would internally. Again, the trade-off is though that you're one of 100 products that Motorola is selling at that point. So there's not a ton of direct attention on you. But that being said, we've seen comparable companies in the space that moved away from a direct to a channel. They've 10x their sales in 18 months. So we know. So some of those companies on the security side are going to be like Johnson Control or Motorola. To some degree, some of the more interesting public safety companies that are out there, like Axon, seeing tasers, right? They're known for making taser, but they do a ton of other stuff in the public safety space. They make,
Body cam footage, I think.
body cam. They make most of their money actually storing like the data management side of the body cam footage, but they're trying to own the entire life cycle of public safety technology. So these are like major players that we're trying to plug ourselves into to where it makes sense. And then you've got like some major sort of regional integrators as well that you've never heard of most likely, but like they make sense for us and like they're out there within our customer footprint already. So that's really where we're focusing. We're obviously still going to keep a direct sales team. Our go-to-market team right now, we basically have 3 different verticalized go-to-market teams. So we have an education team, we have a commercial enterprise team, and then we have our defense government solutions team. So they're going to stay intact because we still get a ton of inbound stuff, inbound leads, inbound sales, and all this other stuff. So we're going to keep that in place. And now the question is like, how do we build a partnership team that fully is able to squeeze like all the juice out of partnerships? It's not just direct sales, right? Or referral or reseller agreements. There's a ton of like co-marketing that goes into it, right? There's a ton of like integration work where we have to integrate to like those body cameras, for example, right? Or we integrate video management systems and mass notification platforms and public safety information management tools and all these different things that are really common in the industry. So our partnership team needs to own the integration piece as well. And then once that's successfully done, go market that. So there's co-marketing. And historically, as a company, like we've been really bad at doing that. It's not bad. We just haven't focused on it, right? Now we're like rethinking, okay, how do we focus on that? How do we make sure that we're capturing as much of that relationship as possible, making it public, showing the public what we're actually doing, capability improvement. So I'm really excited to see how that goes.
Being on the bleeding edge, as you call it, which is a very accurate term of like several different spaces that you guys are working in, you no doubt have experienced just a tremendous amount of challenges just from one being a tech company, being just a small business in general. You're going into a big policy related and driven field. I want to dig into some of the business lessons that you've taken away from this space. I think the best place to start, something that you had brought up to me when we were talking, is trying to decide what to work on, which really plugs into that dual use case thing that we were talking about, is the problems that are worth tackling and where to spend your time. What have you really taken away from your experience with Zero Eyes and deciding what's worth working on?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that we wrestle with every day. Actually, like my CEO called me today, was like, "Hey, check out this email. Is this a problem worth working on? Should we continue the conversation that we're having with another totally different capability that could be complementary?" And we looked at it and we're like, "No, it's not worth our time and effort right now." We have that conversation multiple times a week, and it's not unique to us. This is basically any AI or software company. A lot of companies have the propensity to chase really shiny objects. And I think a superpower is knowing when that object will actually not be profitable or actually be a drive revenue. And we've made mistakes. We have made mistakes since day one. My benchmark is we continue to make similar mistakes. I hope not at this point. People ask us to develop stuff all the time, different things, different capabilities, right? We have to make really critical decisions on whether that capability is actually something that will, is there an ROI there, right? Not just from a revenue standpoint, but also taking into account like our engineering resources are limited. Our AI machine learning team is limited. The sales and marketing team is capacity constrained right now because we have so much stuff that they're working on. So for us to actually drop what we're doing and work on something new, there needs to be a very clear ROI, like metrically driven ROI. And don't get me wrong, we have people reach out to us all the time trying to partner on stuff and do this and do that and whatever. And like in the first 2 years of the company, I took all those calls, right? Because you have to. You never know what's if something's real or not. I didn't want to be a dick to people. That's part of it too. I still feel bad when I don't take the calls anymore. But realistically, like your time is precious. The more successful you become as a company, the more precious that time gets. And we've had a problem in the past, myself included, particularly me. Like I would get bogged down with all these different partners and trying to figure out this and that and whatever. My Mike Lahib's our CEO. Like his one of his superpowers, probably his best superpower, is the ability to say no. Like that dude can say no to stuff, which I am awestruck by, right? Because my natural inclination is to be optimistic and positive and say yes. So I've learned a lot from him just to be able to say no to stuff. So yeah, I mean that's a challenge. We see competitors chase shiny stuff all the time too. And I think we're at the point now where look, like we really want to avoid those pitfalls. And then here's another challenge too. A lot of companies spend a ton of time focused on what competition is doing. And I've been guilty of that. My team has been guilty of that. I think in the last year or so, we've tried ourselves out of like constantly monitoring competition 24/7 and just focus on building a product that people actually want to use and buy. And that typically takes care of all your competition troubles. So if people are actively using your product and you're expanding and you're keeping retention within your customer set, you're on the right path. So that's something that like sometimes I'll at 2 a.m. I'll go down like weird YouTube rabbits looking at what competition is doing. And like it's not healthy. It's not healthy behavior at all. My wife's like, you gotta stop. And the other thing too is I was at a thing last night where I sort of talked about the same thing, but hiring, right? Particularly for like people that are thinking about starting a business or you have a business you're trying to scale and you want to get new hires in the company. We have made a ton of mistakes with hiring. It's not just us, right? It's very common within those tech startups that you're not always going to make the best hire. But I think with their superpowers, figuring out when that person isn't a cultural fit or they're not a technical fit, and either figuring out something else for them to do in the company to where they'll be a better fit and be a better contributor, or exiting them from the company. And we have let people, to some degree, go on in the company for a lot longer than they should have, even though there were problems identified and we had approached them about it and tried to rectify it and try to get them going. Everybody wants to be a nice guy about stuff, myself included. But at the same time, if someone's not a fit, like it is on you to help remove them as quickly as possible. Like you owe it to your shareholders and you owe it to the other employees. What we have found is that people who are A players do not want to work with C players. There's nothing that quicker to demotivate a really high performing team than to put up with someone who's not performing. And we've made that mistake, unfortunately. Here's what I'll say though, the best and the reason that we hire veterans and love hiring veterans because veterans for the most part are A player performers and they take criticism really well. They take positive reinforcement really well. They're team players. They're resilient. All these different characteristics that we have had instilled in us going through our time in the military, like they are intangible attributes of actually working in a startup. And one of the things right now is we used to like really look for specialist hires in some cases. And now we're like, look, like maybe we can fill that with a generalist veteran who's coachable, who is likable, has that team mentality. And we've largely been successful in the last 18 months hiring people and training them into those roles. We still have to obviously hire some specialist roles, particularly like on the engineering side, right? But what's cool, like we have a bunch of like computer software engineers who are veterans. It's really interesting. And that's something like if we find one of those guys or girls, holy shit, like we're in business and we're making off. So it's really interesting. And not just unique to us, like any of the other companies that like have had a lot of success putting veterans into key roles. But it's not just always leadership. Like it's just those intangible sort of attributes of being a team player, right? And having that culture of overcoming adversity, these different things. Sorry to get on my soapbox there, but those are really common mistakes that we've made. And we're going to continue to make them. And the only thing that we can do is try to be better today than we were yesterday about making mistakes. And here's the thing too, we're seeing like a ton of these companies chase like generative AI and all these different like trendy buzzwords we're saying. Last year or the year before, it was all like Web3, crypto, DAO, right? Blockchain. There will always be that noise in this industry. So you remember like the .com bubble, like in the early 2000s, there will always be companies that chase the wrong things. And you just have to be, hopefully you have a good board, hopefully a good management team that can look at that and say, look, let's just say laser focus on our core competency. Let's be the best in the world at doing something, one thing really well. And then from there you can build. And that's our goal too. We eventually want to broaden ourselves from just doing commercial fire protection and do other things as well, but not for another few years. We want to be best in the world at doing this. Like we want to establish dominance in what we're doing. And I think we're on our way.
If there's one place you can be on a soapbox about how great vets are in entrepreneurship, this is the podcast you can do that on. So thank you.
Right place.
I'm right on the box with you. So thank you. One of the things that you were just talking about is veterans being very suitable for jobs like this. And you're talking about generalists. And I think that there are a lot of talented veteran generalists. I think that's something that really stuck out to me about what you were just saying, because they got skills in specific things, particularly if a vet goes back to school but maybe they don't have the deep expertise in a specific field. How do you think that vets ought to be positioning themselves and applying for roles that are like that? Because you guys might be very forward thinking and understand the value of a generalist position or somebody that's coachable. But when it comes to applying to a lot of other jobs, big companies don't like that. They don't want a generalist. They want somebody who's, hey, we need you to hit all of these specific bullets. So where do you think that ought to turn vets to? Is it finding companies like your guys's? How do they position themselves and look for places where they can fill that role?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, there's like a lot of like thought leadership out there, right, on this subject on LinkedIn, other places.
Be a thought leader here for us. Come on.
I'm not very thought leader, but let's see. And I was having this conversation yesterday with a guy that I consider a mentor. He's retiring after almost 30 years of service, and he was extremely good to me at one point when I was like a young junior officer. I learned more from this guy than basically everybody else. And he was a prior enlisted EOD guy and then made the jump over to officer. So he's seen both sides of this. And I was sitting there talking to him yesterday and he sent me his resume. He's like, can you look at this and see if this, like, what do you need corporately, right? And I was like, look, dude, like your biggest talent that you have after knowing you for the last 15 years is you bring you bring organization to chaos, right? You organize chaos, right? At the end of the day, like that is what veterans are really good at. And when I first left the military and went to work in consulting, and I got put on these projects with really big companies, like Fortune 15 companies. And I just assumed that these companies were like oiled machines, right? And everybody was smart and capable and like motivated. They're out there like printing money, right? And it turns out like, no, these companies are fucking dumpster fires, right? Every possible thing you could think of was going wrong on these projects. And these were companies that have $50 billion market cap or more. And I remember this consulting partner coming to me, like, we need someone to basically like, to herd the cattle, right? It's like, it's a goat group out there. I'm thinking like, yeah, like this is what veterans I think are good at. We obviously, as veterans, we're used to coming with processes in place, right? And we're used to like, there's checklists and this and that. But in the absence of that, we're also really good at building something that makes sense from a process standpoint. And that's one of the superpowers that like veterans need to be better about advertising. We're also really bad about advertising like individual accomplishments. Everything's team based. So like the team did that, the team did this, and we executed these missions, right, as a team. And like being able to separate yourself from the team and take some sort of basically give yourself some accomplishment for what you actually did is really tough. The good news, I think, is like in most big companies now, particularly in the last 10, 15 years, they've done a good job about bringing in like veteran talent action people that can better translate resumes into skills. I made every mistake in the book when I was like first leaving the military. I did a horrible job networking. I took basically the first job that actually, I don't tell people this. I actually contracted the Pentagon for 4 months because I literally took the first job that someone offered me. It was terrible. I hated my life. I was commuting from Annapolis every day. And I left after 4 months. I was part of the statistics that say most veterans leave their first job within a year. So I think it's like 80% really is an astronomically high number of people that leave within the first year because I did not do a good job preparing myself. And then I went back to active duty for 18 months. I wasn't ready. It's pretty common out there. I did a somewhat better job the second time around and was able to go into consulting at one of the big four. And then that was cool. I learned a ton, but I came in, I was older than most of my peers that I was my peer group that I was working with. I didn't have an MBA, so that was separated me a little bit. Like a lot of these guys and girls have gone on to like really good business schools. And they came in with a fresh set of eyes on some of these consulting things that really encouraged me. I was like, I have to go get my MBA just to be competitive here if I'm going to stay here. So it's stuff like that. But I think like nowadays, like there's a lot of really good veteran transition stuff out there. And I think you just kind of have to like follow the playbook. If you're interested in going to work for a big company, reach out to the veteran talent acquisition people. Like their job is literally to have a conversation with you to see like where you could be a fit. And then if you want to go into the startup space or smaller companies, most smaller companies, I don't read resumes. Like when we hire people, I don't read resumes. I don't want your resume. I want to have a conversation with you more than anything. And I think that's still a really common thing with smaller companies. We don't have time to read resumes, and we're not built that way. We move way too fast. So we largely rely on the referral network. Like we hire people within our network. I would say the vast majority of the company, by and large, has been hired through the network. We've made a few like outside hires for like marketing specialty roles, engineering specialty roles, where we've had to work with recruiters or whatever. But then again, like they're also the recruiter's job is to come in and help translate that person's skills and experience into the position that you're looking for. So I don't just get answer your question, man, but there's a ton of good resources out there. People are on LinkedIn with good stuff. And I think to most companies' credit, they do a really good job now of trying to work with veterans and find the right fit. I don't think that was true necessarily like 15 or 20 years ago, but I think it's certainly true today.
Likely the best time it's ever been to be a vet. I
Yeah.
think that as time progresses, things only improve over time. So I think we're headed in the right direction, despite what a lot of people might think. One more thing that I want to dig into with you that you really dug in on in our previous conversation, talking about the idea of failing forward, topic that is used and talked about a lot. I would love to hear about maybe a specific, maybe like big trip up that you guys have had, or maybe a specific instance that it witnessed or experienced where that came into play and why you feel so strongly about it.
Yeah. Yeah. To your point, it's a really common thing that people throw around these days. When I think of feeling forward, right? Like we're not always going to have good days, right? We've we've had tests that went poorly, whether it was on us or not. Most of it wasn't on us. It was end user error and whatever else. And I think early on in the company, that would have demotivated a lot of people. And that certainly happened early on in the company. But when I think about failing forward, it's okay, like how do you pick yourself up and move on? How do you make sure that end user customer understands what happened? And most importantly, what are you doing to rectify that? AI is like not a perfect science. Like there will always be issues with AI. And I don't know if people really understand that. So it's a big education piece to our end users and clients. And it's how you move on after a failure that's going to want to keep them doing business with you. And this is where I see a lot of other companies in the space trip up and dissolve, sometimes like overnight, because they've had a series of bad pilots or tests or whatever, and they don't want to take ownership of it. And they fail. They're never able to move forward based on from those events. When we were first starting the company, yeah, I think earlier you asked about why was no one else doing this before? The truth is there were other companies that were like a little bit before us in the space trying to do either the exact same thing or a similar thing. And they have all crumbled. If you go to their former leadership, they'll be like, oh, we crumbled because of COVID, or we crumbled because the market timing considerations weren't right, or we crumbled because selling into the physical security space is really hard. If you're selling to like guys that are former law enforcement or former military, they're skeptical of everything. They don't want to believe it. And like, dude, like we had literally had all the same challenges, the exact same challenges that these companies did. And we have succeeded in spite of those. And the reason why is because we're resilient and we fail forward. And when we do fail, we take ownership of why we failed. And this continues to happen today. The only thing you can hope is like you fail a little bit less every day than you did the day before. And another specific thing on the defense side, I think it's a good example. Our first defense contract was a little bit different. Like most small tech companies go through this thing called the SBIR route, the Small Business Innovation Research Grant. They get like a phase one, which is a small amount of money to go prove out a concept. And then if that's successful and there's interest within the Department of Defense with end users, they'll get a phase two, which is more money, in some cases up to $3 million, I think, to build this out and show more of the capability. And then if all that's successful and there's enough interest and money out there, then go to phase three. We were a little bit different. In some degrees, we were lucky. So we sidestepped that whole process and we got put onto an IDIQ contract as a subcontractor to a prime with the Joint AI Center. And the Joint AI Center has been rebranded into the something called the CBAO. But at the time, the Joint AI Center, the JAKE, as people used to call it, they were the center of excellence for all things AI within the Department of Defense. And they had a really big focus on building like object recognition models, particularly for ISR platforms and aircraft. Some of the stuff we were doing was more like ground based, right? And talk about failing forward. We got an IDIQ contract, and I'll never forget this. It was for $1.77 million, which at the time was like, holy shit, that is a huge amount of money. How are we ever going to be able to service this contract? And we did about, I want to say it was like the period of performance, I think it was like a year, maybe it was like 15 months. Either way, we did like half of it. And during that time, the Department of Defense decided that they were going to sunset the platform that we were specifically building software for, right? We're going to build a software and like those camera systems weren't going to exist anymore. And I think a lot of companies like that would have been like, how do you get around the bureaucracy of the DoD? And we got kicked off the IDIQ. I think we realized about 950K of that IDIQ, which is still a lot of money for us back in 2019. But that being said, most people were, I think if you're an investor, you look at that, oh, this project failed, right? You didn't recognize all the revenue that you could have. But look, like tough and resilient, and we're going to keep working to get around things as long as we possibly can. And as it turns out, that Joint AI Center project, even though it was a failure, launched us into the DoD and basically got us over a bunch of red tape and bureaucratic hurdles into direct to phase 2 contracts. But we didn't have to go through phase 1s, which is very unusual. And because we had advocates in the DoD, we had a track record, people saw what we built, they were excited around it, even though the project failed. That's what I'm talking about, failing forward. And then every day, like just on a personal level, right? Like we all have failures or things that we wish we could have done better from like a management perspective or from a leadership perspective. And those are things too that I try to be somewhat introspective at the end of the day and be like, did I do everything I needed to do? That's another thing I think veterans are really good at. And I don't think corporate America is at all good at that. We are used to taking ownership and leadership and accountability for our people. Like people are the platform, right? Like the soft credo. And we're really good at that. And I think veterans bring that over into corporate America better than anybody else. And that's not to say that like I'm a perfect leader. I fuck up all the time. As long as like you continue to basically unfuck yourself the next day, I consider that failing forward.
What is it that you think that the veteran community could learn only from you?
Nothing. I could probably teach a master's level course on failure at this point. But yeah, I think that I don't have any like specific skill sets or I'm no smarter than anybody else out there. I got lucky. I've tried to like be resilient and keep at it. Tried to be like flexible. As I told the guys who found the company, like I will be anything to the company that the company needs. Like I'm all in on this company. This is 100% my financial future. I basically liquidated all of my retirement accounts, all of my savings, all of it put into the company. And so we can't fail. This is a no fail mission for us. I don't think that I have any specific insights that are any better than anybody else out there, but it's been cool. Like one of the cool things, I get to work with really motivated veterans every day. Like it's a continuation almost of the military. To some degree, the stakes are even higher now because like I have a family that I have to provide for them. But yeah, man, like nothing specific, right? I think we're a cool company. I think we're trying to do stuff. I hope that more companies like follow in our footsteps and look at the roadmap that we built to basically be like, look, like you can employ veterans into really meaningful jobs. You can build really interesting, cool tech platforms and actually do something for society. You build tech for humanity's sake, essentially. And then you can also still be profitable and investable and scalable. Eventually, be a very strong capitalist free market company. And that's the other part of America is like building companies that are going to exist in perpetuity. I don't know. That's not a good answer, but yeah, I don't have anything special.
I'll let you off the hook. That was a pretty good response. Kieran, I really appreciate your time today. This has been a super fun, enlightening conversation. Got a lot to think on because of this, so I'm appreciative of that. What can myself or the listeners do to be useful to you?
Cool. Yeah. Hey, Brock, thank you for your time and everything you're doing. This is really awesome. It's awesome to see all like guys like you move into this and try to like shine some light into places and hopefully inspire other people to A, be an entrepreneur, B, join a really cool company, like makes something of their veteran background, go to a place that appreciates it. We're like everybody, right? We would love for people to interact with the company. So you can follow us all over social media, ZeroEyes.com. We have LinkedIn, we have Twitter. We just got our Instagram account going back again, as my wife tells me. So we're all over the social media stuff. We're growing really quickly. Again, like our core focus of the business is always going to be school security, school safety. So if we're a fit somewhere, you happen to know somebody that you think would be interested, we are happy to reach out and talk to basically any school at this point. We cut schools discounts because we're trying to basically get this universally adopted across schools. The other thing too is our goal is to hire a lot of veterans. So if you like what you heard from like a mission standpoint, please reach out. We're happy to have a conversation. Even if you're not a fit here or we don't have anything for you immediately, we work with every cool tech company on the face of the planet at this point. So all the big ones, Google, Microsoft, all those guys, and then a ton of smaller cool companies, a ton of cool defense tech companies. We are happy to make introductions. It's something that we do like religiously almost every single week. Is we have strap hangers in the company that check in with us every few weeks, and if we over time, if we can't hire someone, we'll definitely make intros in other cool companies. So that's pretty much it. That's what I got.
That's awesome, man. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Brock.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. Your listenership helps me better educate people like you and the rest of our nation's military, both past and present, on building a successful life outside of military service. If you're looking for more ways the top vets are leading more effective lifestyles, building businesses, and using the resources designed specifically for you, press here for a selection of some of the best clips. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date, and I will be talking with you soon.